Hello, I'm Mark Price. I'd like to talk to you today about faith. You know, faith, that's believing in something you can't see, but you have a reason to believe in it. In our readings today, we're shown ways to get closer into our faith and to live out our faith in a world that is pulling against us, in a world that wants us to look in its direction. How can we be true to our faith? How can we be true to God? And how can we be a good neighbor? So in the first reading today, which is from Deuteronomy, we hear about Moses, and he is about ready to say goodbye to the Israelites. He has been leading them for 40 years. He has taken them out of bondage, out of Egypt, where they had been enslaved for many generations, and he's led them across the desert for 40 years. You remember the parting of the Red Sea, and now they are 40 years later at the entrance to the Promised Land, and Moses is giving his final talk, his pep talk, if you will, after leading them all these years. And he's telling them that when they go into the Promised Land, it's all about a new beginning. It's all about starting fresh with this newfound faith. You will find God in all things. Look for God in all things. He will remind them that it is a new beginning, this coming to the Promised Land, this thing called faith. In the past, over the 40 years, by the way, a lot of people said that where they crossed the Red Sea and to where they finally arrived at the Promised Land was really about a 2-week walk, but it took them 40 years. Somebody suggested he should have listened to his wife and stopped and asked for directions. But nonetheless, 40 years, had to go through a couple of generations to get out the old mindset, the old paradigm out of them, so that they could be prepared for the new paradigm, the new beginning that comes with faith. And that's what they are getting. So Moses is giving them the pep talk as they begin this new beginning, this entry into the Promised Land and starting this new life with God. And Moses is saying, adhere to the teachings of the prophets, adhere to the Torah, adhere to the commandments, and just know that God is there for you. Stop looking for miracles for your faith. Remember, the Israelites kept saying, well, I'll believe if he can feed us. And he brings the manna from in the middle of the desert. I will believe if he will give us water to drink, and there's water coming out of stones. So God kept performing miracles, and Moses is saying, stop looking for the miracle and look for God. God is in all things, and if you adhere to your faith, then you are going to find God. And it's going to be a completely new beginning for you. That's why we wandered around the desert, to get that old mindset out of your system so that you can start fresh and start new. And anytime we come to faith, it really is about a new beginning. I was thinking when I was preparing this about the thief on the cross. You had 2 thieves that were crucified with Jesus, one on either side. And one of them kept making fun of Jesus, kept pestering him, kept saying, well, if you really are God, why don't you bring the angels down and they can save you from being on the cross? And the other thief told the fellow to be quiet, said, knock it off. We deserve to be here. We're criminals. We're thieves. We've earned this cross. We are being punished because we deserve it. This man has done nothing. He is innocent, and yet he is here being punished. And then the thief who acknowledged Jesus for who he was, an innocent man being punished, turns to him and says, when you enter into your kingdom, please remember me. And then what does Jesus say? Does Jesus say, well, have you followed the Torah? Have you followed the commandments? Do you keep holy the Sabbath? Do you go to church every day? Have you learned the sacraments? Have you been going and getting your sacraments regularly? Have you gone to catechism? Have you gone to RCIA or OCIA? Have you done this, that, and the other thing? And the answer is no. Jesus says one thing to him. He said, today you will be with me in paradise. So this thief has come to Jesus, acknowledged who Jesus was by saying, when you are in your kingdom, please remember me. he defends Jesus by telling the other guy to be quiet. We deserve it. So he is basically acknowledging his own sins. We deserve being here. And then he shows Jesus he wants a relationship with Jesus by saying, remember me when you are in your kingdom. And see, that's all we have to do. We don't need the sacraments. We don't need the Ten Commandments. We don't need the other things that churches throw on us. Those are all good things. Those are all powerful things. Those are all things that help us grow in our faith, grow in our relationship with God through Christ, but they don't get us to heaven. What gets us to heaven is what this thief did, acknowledging Jesus, confessing our sins, and saying, I want a relationship with you. And that is what the thief did, and that's why Jesus says to him, today you will be with me in paradise. I heard a preacher many, many years ago talk about that thief when he died and he went to heaven, and he's wandering around in front of the gates of heaven, and some officials come out and they see him and they say, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm trying to get in. And they said, well, what makes you think you should be here? He looked at them and he said, the man on the cross invited me. You see, that man on the cross, Jesus invites all of us. All we need to do is acknowledge him as Lord and enter into that relationship with him. Everything else is good if it brings us to a stronger relationship, a greater understanding. But it's that new beginning we get by entering into that relationship with Jesus. The new thief got the new beginning. The Israelites got their new beginning in the promised land. Anytime we come to faith and we get active in our faith, we have a new beginning ahead of us. So let us embrace our new beginnings as people of faith. In the second reading today, we hear Paul talking to the Colossians. Now, the Colossians were a church that were primarily people who were not Jewish. They were probably people who were pagans. They were definitely people who were coming to faith probably for the first time, and they didn't have a grounding. They didn't have a well-established understanding. So in the first reading, we see that faith brings us to a new beginning. In the second reading today, Paul to the Colossians, he's giving us a new understanding. So a new beginning and then a new understanding. These people were struggling to understand what it meant to be people of faith. And so Paul is telling them who Jesus is. This person you're having faith in is the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is why all was created. He created it all, and it was created in him and through him. So Paul is trying to lay the foundation, the groundwork, to help them better understand. So when we come to faith, we get a new beginning and we get a new understanding. And that's where going to catechism, that's where our reading scriptures, that's where our praying, that's where our coming to a greater knowledge of Jesus is helpful. Going to Mass, going to church on a regular basis is helpful. It helps us to grow in that relationship, and that's what we're called to do. It helps us to grow stronger in our faith and grow in the fundamentals of faith, and that's why it's important. So the first reading, new beginnings. The second reading, Paul to the Colossians, is new understanding. And then in today's gospel reading, new challenges. We get new challenges. When you enter into your faith, it's not just that. Unless we're like the thief who dies shortly after, we have a life ahead of us. So when we enter into our faith in God through Jesus Christ, we are faced with new challenges. Today's gospel, we hear of the man coming to Jesus and says, I know that to earn my eternal reward, I have to follow the commandments. And I do that. And he says, I know that I have to love God and then love my neighbor. And then he asks Jesus a question. He says, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus tells the famous story of the Good Samaritan. He talks about the man who was beat up and robbed, left on the side of the road for dead. And a priest goes by and ignores him. A Levite is a Jewish person of the tribe of Levi. Usually they are the priestly people. And he ignored this man on the side of the road. And then along comes a Samaritan who were pretty much disliked by, hated by the Jewish people. And the Samaritans didn't like the Jewish people either. but it's the Samaritan who stops. Not the priest, not the Levite, but the Samaritan who stops and takes care of the man. Makes sure his needs are being met, takes him to a place where they can nurse his needs back to health, and pays for his treatment, and then even comes back on his way back around to check in on him. So Jesus turns to the man after telling the story and says, well, which one of those three, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan was the good neighbor? And the man says, well, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus says, you have told rightly, you have understood, you have said rightly, now you go and do the same. So when we come to faith, we have to recognize that there will be new challenges. We have to be open to those challenges. And one of them is to see everyone that God puts in our path as our neighbor. I remember when I was in my really bad rollover accident, I had a lot of people who came to my aid, who were good neighbors. A lot of people who I didn't even know or I knew very little. Initially, the people who cut me out of the car and got me to the hospital. Then the priest, Father Ron, who was called, who paid for the ambulance to take me from the hospital in Mexico to the United States. And then my sister, who was with me at the hospital every single day for almost a month. All were good neighbors. Deanna, who offered me her house, so when I was let out of the hospital after almost a month, they would not release me unless I was going to some place that I would be looked after. Deanna, who we barely knew each other, took me into her house, and I lived there for 3 months as I was recovering. All good Samaritans. And there were many others, many who sent letters and cards of encouragement, who sent donations to help me offset the costs. Many good neighbors. We are called as people of faith to be good neighbors to people, whether we know them or not. And so the challenge for us is to recognize who our neighbor is, and Jesus says everyone is our neighbor. Francis of Assisi, who we all know, had many different things happen to him in his life when he was trying to discern, was God calling him? What does God want me to do? He had one episode after another, but the final episode that convinced young Francis that God was calling him to be in ministry was when he was out and he experienced the leper. He hated lepers. He used to say, he wrote down in his notes that they made him sick to his stomach, so he tried to avoid them. But the one day when he saw these lepers, and he was not sickened by them, but rather he wanted to go to them, he goes over to the lepers, he embraces them, and it says he paid them homage. He was courteous to them. He probably gave them clothes or food. He cared for them. And so it is when we rise above ourselves and see the needs of others as more important than ourselves, then we are being a good neighbor. And that's what the gospel is calling us to do. So the first reading today is saying when we come to faith, we will have new beginnings in our life. Be open to those new beginnings. The second reading is saying there will be new understandings. We will have a greater understanding of who God is, who Jesus is. And then in the gospel, we're told that we have new challenges. We have things that will happen in our lives that as people of faith we need to respond to. And the one item that is talked about is when we see somebody in need, they are our neighbor. We have to see them as our neighbor. We have to reach out to them and be good neighbors to them. I always remember, in closing, I'll point out the great philosopher of the 20th century, Mr. Rogers, always used to talk about welcome to the neighborhood. And then he'd end his show by saying, and won't you be my neighbor? So I'm asking you, won't you be my neighbor? Let us be neighbors. Let us show love with each other. Let us allow our faith to grow in ourselves, and then by extension, the faith will grow in other people. Amen? This is Mark Price. Thanks for listening.